Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It is the 2019 season of Breaking Down Security. I'm Brian Brake. With me, as always, is Mr. Betcher.
Hello.
And unfortunately, Ms. Berlin is schmoozing at ShmooCon. I can't take credit for that joke. That was Mr. Betcher's joke. But she is with us, will be with us back when she gets back from ShmooCon. We'll be getting a full report from ShmooCon from her about all the comings and goings. And if you do see her at Shmoo, whenever this goes out, it'll probably be after Shmoo. But, if you saw her, we'd love to hear some feedback and hear how awesome it was. So, Mr. Betcher, how are you doing this week?
Not bad.
Yeah? This is Go ahead.
Just living the dream, man. Tell you what.
Sounds like some odd audio from you. You're at work, aren't you?
Oh, yeah, I'm traveling.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Can you tell us where you're at?
Away from home. No, I'm undisclosed right now.
Oh, okay. Where in the world is Mr. Betcher?
Yes.
That's a game.
I'm not at ShmooCon, actually.
Oh.
So there you go.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, this is one of those rare shows we do where, neither one of us are at home. I'm at the office, actually. We're recording during the day because our guest is a few time zones away from us. And, yeah, she's across the pond, as it were. So let's go ahead and get her on because I'd like to talk to her because I also, unfortunately, I have stuff I have to do at work, so I need to get back to work. Being a PM is hard work. So she is the technology evangelist with container security specialist Aqua Security. She works on container-related open source projects, including KubeHunter and KubeBench. She was the co-chair of the CNCF, and I'll ask her what that is in a minute, KubeCon and Cloud Native Con 2018 events in Copenhagen, Shanghai, and Seattle. And she's the co-author of the O'Reilly Kubernetes book. So when she's not building startups and writing code, she enjoys riding bikes in places with better weather than her native London. She came to Seattle, and obviously there was better weather here than in London. But anyway, so welcome Liz Rice to the show.
Hi, thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, Seattle was pretty much the same as London in December. It was, not appealing to be outside.
See, and the problem was you left, and immediately we had like a week where it was sunny, no clouds, nothing, and it was a little windy. But now we're heading into what the local weather people are calling second winter. So we're, we have a second winter. So, oh my goodness, I thought Ms. Berlin would be schmoozing at ShmooCon, but there she is. Hello.
Hi, I don't know how great this is going to work. I'm tethered right now to my phone.
That's okay. I'm tethered to my phone, too. Ms. Berlin, we are actually recording right now. We started without you, unfortunately. I apologize. Meet Ms. Rice. Meet Ms. Rice. We just started recording. So, Ms. Rice, Ms. Berlin.
Hi.
You two have a lot in common. Yeah, you two have a lot in common. Both of you are O'Reilly authors, or co-authors in this case, of very successful books.
Woo.
Yeah. So that's Ms. Berlin's Slack notifications.
Yeah. I'm messing this up already, aren't I?
That's okay. It's all right. We're just happy you're here. So Ms. Rice, we wanted to have you on because we've had numerous podcasts talking about DevOps Sec and Sec DevOps and DevOps Sec and whatever version you want to put Sec in there in the labeling. You have a very interesting take on how to shift left, which in this case is how to get security in to the DevOps process as soon as possible. Maybe you could kind of give us an idea of what that is in your respect.
Yeah, so this is all really about containerization, really. It's about how when you move to containers and a CI/CD system, you start having these kind of small, isolated pieces of software, and you can start looking at addressing the security of those individual pieces of software that you're going to containerize earlier in the CI/CD pipeline than is practical when you're building a monolith.
Right.
Containers actually end up giving you, it's very easy to look at containers and be kind of worried about some of the security aspects, and we can talk about that for as long as you like. But there's also a bunch of advantages that you get from moving to containers by breaking your software down into these individual components, you can secure each of those individual components. So you can add an extra layer of security around each of those components.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about shifting left, we can be doing things like in pushing responsibility back to developers to say, when you build this container image, you're going to be, pushing code that gets built into a container image, and you need to make sure that that image is free of vulnerabilities as far as possible. And maybe your organization has some policies that they apply for security reasons to those container images. And you can check those things at build time. So reasonably early in the pipeline. There are things you can do at the test stage as well. But really in the build phase, you have this great opportunity to basically push back and say, you know what, that insecure version of that particular package, don't use that.
Right.
Pull in a dependency that is not known to contain vulnerabilities. You can push that back to developers way before it gets anywhere near hitting a production server. So it's really effective. If you can do vulnerability scanning, it's a really effective way of pushing a huge part of the security concern right as far left as you possibly can.
Right. So one of the things I was thinking of when I was reading all of these things, and I love the idea of your non-privileged containers, which we'll talk about in a few minutes here. If security needs to shift left, we hear that, security needs to shift left, security needs to shift left. In a lot of organizations, it's hard for them to do that because it seems like everyone's expecting security to make the shift and to get, to wedge themselves in. And obviously the development cycle needs to make some accommodations for that. So instead of, 100 releases a day, you're going to, maybe only put out 80 a day. What are some of the things that developers can do when initiatives, and they hear, oh no, security is going to be invading our space? What can they do to help kind of ease that transition? And I'm not blaming all devs or all organizations on the fact that they can't get security in there, but it seems like security is the ones that seem to have to make the most change in this case. But, what can devs do to help fix that?
It's an important cultural shift that needs to be happening here. And it's all part and parcel of the cultural shift that happens when organizations adopt DevOps. And, you mentioned DevSecOps, or however, whatever order you want to put the dev and the sec and the ops. The important thing is to get all those different people communicating earlier on in the process. So traditionally, we've seen organizations where, you build software or developers build software, and then they kind of throw it over the wall to operations people who deploy it. And they kind of throw the security concerns over the wall to a security team. Mm-hmm. In this DevSecOps environment, it's got to be a much more collaborative approach. It's got to involve things like, okay, so the security team have a view on, let's say, which, let me step back a second. When you're building a container image, you are generally basing that image on or from a base image. And for a lot of organizations, they'll have some fixed base images. Maybe there's a base image that you use for Java and a base image that you use for Python and what have you. Mm-hmm. And the security team can be involved in saying, okay, what versions of packages do we want in these base images? What level of base images are we going to support from a security perspective? And they have, they can be sort of defining in collaboration with the development team who are saying, well, actually, I need version, 1.7 of whatever particular bit of software they need. That discussion about what the requirements are and what the dependencies are has to happen. It can happen much earlier in the process. It can happen before the developer even builds that image, rather than, security being a kind of sticking plaster thing that you do at the end of the process. But yeah, it absolutely requires a cultural change involving discussion earlier on and understanding how much automation can really help with the security of all these things. I think one of the things that is scary when you think about containers is you go from having a handful of servers, let's say, and having to worry about what versions of things need patching on those servers. Suddenly you can be talking about thousands of container instances, and inside each of those container instances you've potentially got a whole Linux basically, and with all various different packages and various different dependencies and various different executables. And if you think about that with a traditional mindset, you think about it with the traditional approaches to security, it's just impossible. It would be unmanageable to go through all those thousands of containers and patch them.
Right.
You've got to be thinking much more about programmable everything, sort of infrastructure as code. Containers are immutable. You don't patch a running container, you blow it away and deploy a new one based on a new fresh build of the image.
Right.
And all these kind of changes of approach and using these automation tools. And again, you can't really have that discussion without sort of including security in the whole DevOps discussion. How's that CI/CD pipeline going to be built? What do we need to have at each stage in that pipeline?
Mm-hmm. Right on.
When you push left, what are the advantages and disadvantages of doing that? Because there's a cost, a consequence maybe to doing or to making a change like that. Can you talk about what may be a disadvantage here?
I think the biggest disadvantages that we see are really come down to that cultural question, and about organizations need to know why they're doing this. They can spend a lot of time and effort and energy embracing this whole cloud native world, this whole DevOps world, this whole automation world, and they need to know what they're getting out of it. And usually what they're getting out of it is some ability to ship functionality more quickly. There's usually some kind of business motivation behind that. But I think people sometimes go, oh, containers, we want some of that. We want some of this fancy DevOps thing that we've heard about. Like, let's have some of that because it's fashionable. And that's a terrible reason to do it. It's got to be done with sort of objectives in mind, sort of understanding of what the impact is going to be on the business, and an understanding on how this is going to require actually quite a lot of education. There's a lot of people at all the stages of this pipeline who are going to have to understand containers. Maybe they're going to have to understand Kubernetes. Maybe they're going to have to understand how they're going to be automating all the infrastructure deployment. Maybe they're using things like Terraform. There's loads of new tools, loads of new education, new things that they're going to need to be educated about. And that's, it's time and effort and cost to educate all the people in your organization.
Right. Cool.
I think that's probably the main downside. The upside is that business agility that you can get out of it. And ultimately, from a security perspective, as I was saying earlier, this kind of decomposed architecture, if you decompose your architecture into containers, you can add extra layers of security around each of those smaller pieces of software.
So for the developers, it's harder for them to find these vulnerabilities on their own than it is for you to find them and just tell them what to fix.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is where things like vulnerability scanners, image scanners come into play. So they're automating that process and reporting on, for each image, what the set of vulnerabilities are in that image. Mm. This is one of the things that we do at Aqua. And we actually have a free version of an image scanner called Microscanner. It's actually the same scanning as our commercial product, but just kind of integrated in a slightly different way.
Is that a static analysis tool?
Yeah. So it's indexing all the contents of your container image against a database of known vulnerabilities.
Uh-huh.
So I have a question about
when I'm telling people about, like, what's the sort of, what are the number one thing they should do for securing their containerized deployment, using a vulnerability scanner is the first thing. Like that's kind of the most effective thing you can do.
We've had a couple of shows recently with some Node folks, the director of security for Node, and somebody from Google who's trying to strengthen the Node Node.js stack, for instance. And we hear about dependency hell all the time, and how good a job do these vulnerability scanners do against dependency hell? If your app that you've got containerized takes several hundred dependencies, it's hard enough for security people to do it. I'm sure most shops out there that are doing CI/CD kind of pipelines are not even bothering to look at it because it's just a time and effort waste for them.
Yeah, you've got to automate it, really, because if you're running at any level of scale, you'd have too many images to feasibly look at manually. So vulnerability scanners, there are several of them out there, and if anybody says to you, yeah, my image scanner give you no false positives, it's probably not doing any checking at all. I would be extremely skeptical if there's somebody saying there's no false positives. But the biggest difference that distinguishes one image scanner from another is the extent to which you get false positives. And that depends on mostly how many different sources you're taking and how good those sources are for the data, for not just which versions, but which patches of which versions of a given package contain whatever vulnerabilities.
Right.
But I've had conversations with people who've tried using image scanners and they've been put off by the level of false positives, in a kind of the boy who cried wolf sort of a way. They're like, well, it's just constantly telling me everything is horrendously insecure, so I just couldn't get the sort of signal out of the noise.
Yeah.
And I felt like, oh, please just try a better image scanner that gives you fewer false positives. It's really valuable.
Yeah, the problem I had with, and I've worked at a couple of organizations that had, microservices, was that by the time you got done scanning those containers and you put in the tickets to resolve those issues, those instances may not exist. That container may have been blown away hours ago, and now they're chasing wild goose chase and everything. Is there a way to do it smarter? Could you do it on the initial image, or that the cubes are being done from, and that would be a lot easier method? Yes,
you've really got to be scanning the images. Actually, looking at running containers themselves is so for. The best practice is to to have your containers be essentially immutable. So, if you're, God help you if you're SSHing into containers and actually manually changing the software in them, that's there are people who do that, but it's definitely an anti-pattern.
Right.
The best thing to do is to be scanning your images. Ideally, you're doing it not just as you build, but you would be doing it as you build. And also on a regular basis, rescanning all of the images that are currently, in play in your production system, just checking for any new vulnerabilities that may have been discovered since you last scanned those images. And then when you do find a problem in the image, you need to be able to rebuild that image with the patched version of the library, and then redeploy the containers that are based on that image. And that is one of the reasons why tools like Aqua exist, to help you manage that process of identifying which containers you've got running, what images they're based on, and therefore what vulnerabilities they have.
So Liz, help me out. I would think you would scan an image before it goes into production, and not scan them while they're in production. Maybe monitor the network traffic just for attacks or something like that. But your images in production, leave those alone. it's before. Now, where am I going wrong?
So you are absolutely right. You would scan them before you put them into production. But the reason to keep scanning your images like on a regular basis, so for our customers, we're typically saying every day, that would be quite normal, is to pick up when you have an image that hasn't been rebuilt. Maybe it hasn't been rebuilt for months, but a new vulnerability gets discovered in one of the dependencies inside that image.
So you're not deploying them daily.
Correct.
So
correct.
You may deploy one into, okay, I understand.
Yeah, I mean, you might be redeploying them daily, but
Sure.
you need to kind of keep track of that. And it's certainly possible. I mean, it's true that container lifetimes on average are, the number has popped out of my mind, but it's something like 3 days average duration of a container in production. So, but you don't know for sure whether it's been rebuilt. You need to make sure that the image has been rebuilt since the last important patches.
But you could have one standing in a controlled environment, and you're scanning that every day, not just the ones in production, as long as they're the same.
Right, exactly. So this is why you need to treat your containers as immutable, so that the ones that are running in production are the same. And yeah, you can just scan. You only need to scan an image once, even if it's running. There could be 1,000 containers running instances of that container image. But scanning your images means you only have to scan it the one time.
So how long should a container or microservice last? And, I was thinking, of tasks that security people could do to kind of ingratiate themselves to the CI, or the CD pipelines. Should we be looking towards automation for saying, setting an alarm clock like, oh, this container's been up for 3 days. Why hasn't it been blown away and rebuilt? Is that too soon for an image, or are we talking like, is it hours too long for an image to be up and running?
I wouldn't necessarily say hours, but yeah, it is a good thing to be able to blow containers away and replace them. Mm-hmm. There is a concept called reverse uptime, which is exactly this concept that you're describing, which is to say, maybe you don't want your containers to last for more than some number of days, and blow them away and rebuild them should that happen. And you can also do that at the node level as well. So actually blowing away entire nodes in your cluster and re-provisioning them and reintroducing them into the cluster and having your orchestrator just reschedule the containers. And again, all this kind of just blowing things away and letting them be automatically recreated. Automation is your friend. That by recreating it, you have brought it back to the state that it was designed to be in. Every time you recreate a new node programmatically, it's going to be exactly how you intended it to be. And if anything untoward had been happening, if somebody had managed to get some kind of foothold into that node or into that container, you've blown it away.
Nice.
Now, hopefully you've detected issues, but it's yet another level of security, this kind of blowing things away.
I'm going to ask Ms. Berlin a question here. So Ms. Berlin works for an MSSP. Do you have a lot of customers that use microservices, and how do you guys monitor for, uptime, or, do you monitor for vulnerabilities in microservices?
So we don't really have anybody that does it yet. We were talking to somebody that had pretty much everything in the cloud, and it was just that they had containers spinning up and being torn down every, hour or 2 hours or whatever. And I mean, there's some stuff that you can still log on, but it depends on, if that container gets torn down, somebody hacks that container, it gets torn down. If they haven't pivoted or anything, like, they've lost their access. Mm-hmm. So they were looking at more trying to automate like root cause analysis almost, so they could figure out, all right, how did they get there to begin with, and then fix it like up the pipeline more, as opposed to like trying to fix the initial issue.
Mm-hmm. I guess if a hacker was to get into a container, it does make it harder to do lateral movement. I mean, it's still possible, but if you notice something out of the ordinary from a container, it's just easier to blow it away and add a new one, which would automatically would stop a hacker in many cases.
Right.
And it's easier to detect that kind of anomalous behavior if you've got a relatively small self-contained microservice,
right?
Because it's so much easier to say, my kind of example that I always think of is maybe you've got a product search microservice in some kind of e-commerce environment, and that product search component should only ever be making requests to a product database about products. So you start seeing that trying to make some other, I don't know, network traffic call or trying to make some other database request, that's anomalous. You start looking at a container. Another really great example is what executables are running inside that container. Again, another sort of example that I often use for this, a lot of people will run Nginx in a container. Nginx really consists of one executable called Nginx. There's a ton of other executables that are built into the default image because it's based on, I don't recall exactly which Linux distribution, but it's got a whole copy of Linux in there.
Right.
So there's 3 dozen other executables in there, but none of them should ever be running.
Right.
So if you can detect that they're running, or even better, prevent them from running, that's a really good way of spotting anomalous behavior. And you can do that so much more easily with containers and microservices than you ever could with a monolith.
Cool. Okay. So people who engage in CI/CD pipelines and agile development and such, do they use like the tried and true methods of ITIL with like change management and those kinds of things? Because I could definitely see that. And I'm going back to the whole how we're shifting left because we kind of got onto a microservices thing. But is there ways that if they're utilizing change management, that security can be involved in those kinds of processes? And is change management something that people who use Agile, utilize?
Yeah, I think particularly in the more regulated industries, there is still a lot of process around this kind of thing, whether it's called ITIL or compliance under lots of different acronyms, most of which I don't really know.
Right.
But so, for example, in a finance situation, banks will often have a requirement that every code change is reviewed by more than one pair of eyes to basically stop people writing code that siphons money into their own bank account. And making sure that has been, the change has been signed off by that second pair of eyes,
right,
is exactly the sort of check that should be kind of automatable. So, you push a change, I review it and put my signature on it as well. And then further down the pipeline, there should be some kind of check to say, yeah, 2 people who had the appropriate privileges have signed that off and ticked that off.
Sure.
And I think that's the kind of, the solutions for doing this are not quite there yet, to the best of my knowledge, but it's definitely an area where people are working to make that kind of thing happen, these kind of attestations happen.
Right.
And figuring out what is required in each organization and what that kind of pipeline of signatures and attestations looks like. I think that's definitely something that security teams will be involved with and compliance people will be involved with.
Okay. And so go ahead, Amanda. Nope.
Is there any like tips or ways somebody would go about starting moving from like the I don't want to say normal way of doing things, but the way I always see people do things the wrong way, and doing it more security focused like that? Is there any, I don't know, like a 5-step program or anything like that, or at least tips that they can go about doing it the right way to transfer?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think a lot of organizations, they are taking their first steps towards this kind of DevSecOps approach. And oftentimes that isn't going, realistically, it's usually driven by developers. Developers who have fallen in love with all the other cool things that you can do with containers, and then they want to bring those into their organization. And then they sell it to their organization on the basis of agility and ability to deliver function quickly. There's lots of material out there about things you can do to improve security of your CI/CD pipeline. It would be a good idea if people, as they start embracing this thing, think about security from the get-go. There's some great quotes about, can I remember the name of the person who said this? I can't remember the name. That's annoying. But it's basically that, it's incumbent upon organizations to involve security as early in the process as possible. And that you can kind of interpret it in two ways. You can interpret it as involve the security team as early as possible in the process of moving to DevSecOps. And you can also think of it as a kind of, you should involve security automation as early as possible in that pipeline of different steps.
Right.
And there's actually, I did a talk with Justin Cormack from Docker, where we looked at an example of a step that you could take at every stage along your CI/CD pipeline to improve your security, where vulnerability scanning is one thing, but things like having essentially what's called admission control, where you are making sure that you only deploy images that have been through that process of vulnerability scanning. Or another example is just as simple as, run static analysis on the source code. There's no reason to not use the tools that have been good before containers. Carry on using those things. So maybe things like that talk, I would definitely, feel good about people seeing that as part of their early steps, as they're sort of learning how they're going to adopt CI/CD systems.
So you mentioned code reviews, and instead of moving a security person into the spot, would it be easier to repurpose an existing dev to help further the security stuff? That way, I'm not just showing up one day going, look, I'm going to do all these security things, and you've got a guy who's well known in the developer environment already. Hey, I've been asked to do security reviews, or I've been asked to do code reviews, or I have to approve the releases of these things and make sure we're updating. Is making a deputy or making somebody who's already in place a security person, or changing the role a little bit, would that be a way to ease the security into the environment without causing a huge shock?
I think that's a really great idea. A lot of the time people talk about these sort of two pizza teams working on a microservice, and maybe if somebody in that team has a security background, that's hugely valuable. Just being able to help people avoid, code defensively, and to know about some of it. Sometimes it's even the terminology. I came from a development background rather than a security background, and you definitely kind of think, oh, whoa, there's a whole load of really scary things that somebody else knows about. And actually, that kind of, realizing that there's quite a lot of things that you can do to improve security that are kind of common sense, or that,
right,
you just need to learn, or you just need to ask, or, I don't know, things like avoiding SQL injection. It's not a crazy thing to kind of, I'm not expecting every developer to know everything there is about every security aspect, but it's getting expertise, getting information, getting somebody from security who knows about these things to add their opinion. I think that's hugely valuable. Yeah.
Right on. So in my research, I found a term. I don't know if you coined it or if it's something that's already been out there, called forgotten data. What exactly is forgotten data?
Oh, I wonder where that was from. I wonder if this was related to sensitive sensitive data? Could this have been about where people forget that they are leaving credentials in their source code? And for security people, you're probably horrified at the fact that this happens. So I did a talk about how you can manage secrets in containers.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I did this talk, I kind of glossed over the idea that people might have like put their, database tokens or something into source code and GitHub. And what I observed in the audience was a whole load of people kind of scribbling in their notebooks. And they obviously were like, oh, wait a minute, we might have done this. Okay, perhaps
My
we
bad.
should check.
Yeah.
And of course, you hear, bits of analysis where people look at what's in GitHub and how many tokens and keys and passwords and things are sort of readily accessible in code on GitHub. So it's so easy for people to sort of not realize that it's, that those credentials are there. They, forget that they, they put it in because they were testing and it was convenient and easy, and then they checked it into GitHub without really noticing. And it's another thing you can test for automatically. I mean, it's
right.
something that we actually can check for with our image scanner, just looking for things that look like passwords and tokens and flagging those up and not allowing those images to be deployed.
Right. Okay. All right, cool. Yeah. One of the things that we talked about with a couple weeks ago with the IoT top 10 that OWASP put out was hard-coded passwords. During your testing, the hard-coded passwords get left in, not just IoT devices, but we hear it in network infra like Cisco and such. So, those kinds of things can get you in the long run. So,
definitely.
So another thing that I found during my discussions was test-driven development, and how tests and QA can be used in terms to increase security. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit on how that would work.
Yeah. So actually, when I was doing that talk that I mentioned earlier with Justin from Docker, and he wrote a nice little demo of how you can incorporate he used a script called test SSL, if I recall correctly, that, it's going to be checking that you're using up-to-date versions of, SSL libraries and supporting appropriate encryption mechanisms and all that kind of thing. And you can just build that into your testing.
Right.
I think a lot of developers think about, functional testing, maybe they think about performance testing, but you can also include some security testing in there as well. And that could be in the form of, if I issue an API request, anonymously or with a malformed header, do I get something that I shouldn't be able to get? But it could also be things like these, SSL checks.
Right.
And just including those in the tests that you run automatically as part of your CI/CD tooling.
Yep. Shout out to
Really
Dr.
valuable.
Wetter. I love test SSL. I use it all the time. I tell people to use it. So shout out to Dr. Wetter for that awesome script. It's just a bash script that runs, and it's really awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let me see. What do I have for other suggestions?
Okay. So
there you
go. Unless you work for a government, your main concern as a employee of a company or as the company itself is profit, right? So also if you want to show your worth to your organization, you need to be able to either save or produce that profit for your company, right? And that's why they hired you. They hired you for X amount of dollars. They expect X plus this amount of dollars in return in some form. Have you done any analysis, or have you seen any analysis on this, our topic, and the cost benefit of it?
I haven't seen anyone putting numbers on that. But the thing that we hear and the thing that people are frightened of is, we don't want to be the next Equifax. We don't want to be the next Marriott. We don't want to be the next source of, some horrendous headline about, in particular personal data breaches. I think GDPR also made a lot of people's minds focused, at a board level on, are we doing the right thing? Because, if you get caught in, in breach of GDPR, it's a really, 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 really costly fine. And while, that may not be part of your day-to-day, profit figures, it is something that people are, and if they're not, they should be concerned about at board level. So getting, budget to apply appropriate levels of security as part of this move to CI/CD, I think it's kind of irresponsible if you have a DevOps team who are pushing for the agility, but they're not also taking into account that, you've got to be careful. There are exploits attempted, 24/7, and you've got to be on the right side of, headlines for the right reasons, not for losing all your customers' personal data.
Right. Yeah.
But it would be interesting to know what the kind of, if I look at somebody like Equifax or, these big breaches, it would be really interesting to know, had anybody pushed back on security? I know there was an NHS here in the UK, it was the ransomware thing. This is a couple of years ago now, but it basically came down to the fact that the various NHS trusts were attempting to save money by not upgrading their versions of Windows, and they were running versions that were no longer supported. Somebody must have known that.
Oh, sure.
And
somebody made the decision to save money by not upgrading. I would have to think. That's interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what was the savings? And then ultimately, what was the cost?
Right.
Involved?
Yeah. And that would be such an interesting, because it was certainly an extremely costly, 24 hours for them, maybe longer. And you would think that the investment to have prevented that would have been worthwhile. And I'd love to see that analysis.
Mm-hmm. Right on. So one of the other things, and I think we're almost at the bottom here, is like setting. You mentioned setting goals, starting small. So what would an example of a small goal be for a company that maybe doesn't have security built into its pipeline, but is something that is like a good first start? Is it the code reviews, or is it just something as similar as taking stock of what you're running in the environment? I hate to use the top 20 security controls, because I don't think knowing all your software in your environment's a truly knowable thing. But I mean, what are some of the small goals you could do to get that started?
If we're talking about people who are already running with containers, I absolutely 100% of the time recommend vulnerability scanning, image scanning, because it's such an easy thing to automate, and you will be getting yourself much, much more aware, or much, much more knowledge of whether you are running vulnerable packages or not. And without that knowledge, you can't really assess what level of risk, for all you're running with all the major vulnerabilities, and your doors are wide open. Mm-hmm. So particularly given that there are some open source solutions, there are free solutions available, it's such an easy thing to introduce. And then that gives you a kind of baseline knowledge that you can then act from.
Okay. I actually thought you were going to say non-privileged containers. We mentioned that earlier in the show, but is that not a small goal, or is that a huge thing?
The thing about non-privileged containers is that if you're writing your own software, it is pretty easy to kind of in your Docker file say, specify a non-root user. And you should. And there are tools, again, that can police that you do that. If you are using third-party images, unfortunately, quite a lot of those third-party images will run as root by default.
Right.
And while it's like 99.99% of the time, there's no great reason for it to need to do that. The Nginx, again, love Nginx as an example. So, it's software that was designed to run on a host and open port 80, and it runs as root so that it can open a low number port. You put that code inside a container, you've got port mapping, so it doesn't matter what port number you need.
Right.
And therefore, it doesn't need to run as root anymore, but you need to reconfigure it to use a higher number port so that it doesn't need that privilege.
Right.
And while that's not, it's not rocket science to do that, you have to go through those steps to take a sort of Nginx, vanilla Nginx, and turn it into a non-privileged Nginx container. Totally doable. Not the thing that I would recommend as for day zero security task, because there could be quite a lot of those. There are actually some people, like I think Bitnami did quite a lot of work to build non-privileged versions of a lot of popular container images.
So we also shouldn't just blindly trust what's in the Docker marketplace, for instance, right? We shouldn't just be running those. We should be building a company should be building their own for more security.
Yeah, that's generally a good idea. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't work in a CI/CD platform anymore, so we weren't doing that at the old place. We were actually building everything with Puppet and Chef and what have you. But it's like companies that are trying to get into the cloud are like, oh, let's do the microservices thing. It's easy to just Docker install from this site, and supply chain issues abound by this, where it's like, oh, I could just put a malicious container inside there and own hundreds of organizations. So yeah.
There's quite a lot of work going on to be able to police that, to be able to verify the provenance of images by signature.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Right on.
But for today, I think it's the safest approach is to rebuild.
Right on. Ms. Berlin, do you have any questions for Ms. Rice?
I really don't know much about containers at all, and that was really my only one.
Okay, that's cool.
But I've learned a lot.
There you go.
Know that counts.
Well, it sounds like MSSPs like yours will be having to deal with this in the next.
No, it's given me a lot of ideas, just because the thing that we're building right now in the company that I work for, I think we could probably build a lot of detections based around containerization stuff. So it's on my list of things to learn about, but that helped.
It seems like knowing what's normal is more important than ever, because all these containers are supposed to act all the same usuay.
Right. And I mean, in a normal environment, you don't have that level of visibility or knowledge of what anything's doing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's one question. Like, since I've not really worked in many places that have had containers or anything, is there like, other than just like spinning up a whole bunch of Docker stuff that you've downloaded off the internet, like, is there a definite bad way? Like, we see, people in environments that have no asset management. They have no idea what software is running. They have no idea what hosts are on their network. I'm assuming that could happen as well in a situation like this.
Yeah. The kind of equivalent of that in the container world is people deploying a container and then SSHing into the live container and installing software in it.
Right.
Right. And you have no idea. Yeah.
Right.
That's the equivalent. Yeah.
That's completely besides the point of.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Mr. Betcher, same to you. Do you have any other questions for Ms. Rice?
No, I do like the idea of shifting left. I think once it gets established, it's easier.
Right.
To have a more secure environment, but it does take a lot of effort, a lot of education, as you said.
Right.
But I think that going that route, it's totally worth it to put in the time to get those scanning tools in place for code audits, right? And to scan an image before it goes into production, and regularly. like we talked about.
Cool.
Yeah. And then you get into the whole world of the runtime protection stuff where, you're looking at these normal behaviors, you're looking at the network traffic between containers. It's there's a whole kind of world of really cool things that you can do. And that's kind of, I guess, one of the reasons why I really like container security, because there's all these neat things that you can do and neat tooling that you can build or buy to kind of police what's happening inside your containers. It's fascinating.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you coming on. This was definitely something I think was a nice segue between our containers and our IoT and our discussion with the node stuff, because it kind of builds upon everything. So I appreciate you coming on. Are you going to be speaking anywhere in the next, 4 to 6 months?
Oh, yes, definitely. So off the top of my head, I'm in Zurich at the end of January, speaking at an event called Container Stack. I will likely be speaking at DockerCon in San Francisco I want to say that's May. I have a feeling there's a couple of things going on in May. Yeah.
You have a schedule on your website, I believe?
Yeah, I usually publish things on my personal website, so lizrice.com. And,
okay.
Aqua, the Twitter feed for Aquasec team will often be broadcasting what we're doing more broadly, and also hints and tips for container security. So that's worth it.
Awesome.
You wouldn't happen to be going to B-Sides Leads, would you?
I don't know about that one. I've heard of B-Sides, but I didn't know there was one in Leeds.
There is. It is.
That's very cool.
It is next week.
Ooh. Well, I shall see what I can do. I've got
I will be there. So
yeah. Well, if I make it, then we should definitely say hi.
Definitely.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, I guess I know where Miss Berlin is going to be next week. We're recording this on 17 January, so you're going to be in Leeds in the UK next week.
I will. I'm in DC right now at ShmooCon, and then Leeds next week. My kids get to see me for like 1 day out of 10. They're not super happy, but
goodness,
tis the life.
Yeah, and you're doing the mental health village there at B-Sides Leeds, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Will you be speaking?
I guess I'm giving the closing keynote.
Kick ass. Look at that. All right.
I just found that out the other day.
Awesome. Okay. So other than the Aqua Security Twitter, Ms. Rice, is there any other way of somebody, like, let's say they want to talk about container security or maybe invite you to a conference, can they get a hold of you on Twitter or elsewhere?
Yeah, Twitter is a good place to find me, and I'm Liz Rice, which is, if you know my name, I'm easy to find.
Okay, cool. Awesome. And I've got your handle in the show notes, and lizrice.com, and a number of links to maybe other podcasts you went on. We have a link to your Kubernetes book from O'Reilly. We posted a lot of the links from what we talked about today in the show notes. So if anybody's interested, check the show notes at breakingsecurity.com. So, Ms. Manda, you're schmoozing at ShmooCon. You just got there, I assume.
Oh, yes, I just got here.
Okay. I hope you enjoy that and have a lot of fun. I wish I was there.
I'll try not to rub it in too much.
Too late. All right. So, how would people get a hold of you if they wanted to, find you at Shmoo, or just, to talk about mental health, or, your mental health hackers organization?
So both my Twitters now are at InfoSystir, INFOSYSTIR, and at Hackers Health. And we're spinning up the website, I think, today.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Right on.
That worked.
Okay. Mr. Betcher, same to you. How would people get a hold of you if they wanted to talk about LogMD or, automating logging or, talking about DFIR stuff?
So I'm the co-founder of LogMD. So you can check out our website at log-md.com if you need to know things about how to, the best ways to log and alert on Windows environments.
Cool.
So that's my project. Just go there, and Twitter and all that's there. So
cool. Awesome. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Brakesec, Brakesec. I'm on Twitter, Brian Brake, BryanBrake. We have a lot of discussion. We have an IoT and mobile channel on Slack. We also have a container and a CloudSec channel on our Slack, which is it's a very active Slack. So if you're interested in joining that and you want to talk about containers or VMs or Vagrant or any of the other kinds of Kubernetes or tools that are out there, Docker, whatever you wish, you can send us a DM on Twitter, Brakesec, or email us bds.podcast@gmail.com. We have a Patreon account. If you found value in hearing what Ms. Rice had to say, I know I did. Feel free to add a little something to our tip jar there. You can find a link in the show notes to that, or just go to patreon.com and search for BDS Podcast. That goes to paying for the Zoom that we use for this, the website hosting, and just the time and effort for getting a podcast out on a weekly basis, which is no small feat, I can tell you. We're on iTunes. If you want to leave feedback there so we can get more discovery, that would be great. If you use Google, we're on the Google Play Store. We're on iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio app, Slacker, Spotify. We're on Spotify, which is pretty awesome for us. And we have a store if you want to get a T-shirt with Ms. Berlin's face on it. I think we need to probably get one with Mr. Betcher's face on it. Let me take a screenshot real quick. Smile, Mr. Betcher. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, that's awesome. Yes. Hold that pose. But yeah, you can go to TPub or a link in our show notes to buy a T-shirt for Breaking Down Security, or one with Ms. Berlin's face on it, or you can get a coffee mug, or you can get whatever you want. And we do get a little kickback from that. So if you can't give to Patreon, that also gives us a couple of bucks for help. So Ms. Rice, if you have any other topics or anything you'd like to come up and bring onto the show, we'd appreciate you reaching out. Don't hesitate to reach out and help us educate our masses here. So we appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you so much. That's great. Thank you very much.
Awesome. All right, have a great rest of your evening, ma'am. All right, so that was it for Breaking Down Security this week. Have a great week. Be nice to one another. Take care of yourself, because as I and Miss Berlin know, you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And we're done. Woo! Awesome.
Yay.
I love that. That was awesome. Thank you, Ms. Rice.
No, you're welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, I dug up. I was digging up quite a bit of things online here. You did another podcast, so I was listening to that podcast. I might actually add that one. It's more it's go time, but it was more developer based, but I still like it. Wow, it's So you're quite active. You're getting all over the place, aren't you, with the speaking?
Yeah, I do. I speak at quite a few events and try to, write things, do talks, do podcasts,
So
and run some open source projects and build things. Yeah.
So you go to mostly developer conferences?
I would say mostly container conferences, and some. So I have I'm quite involved in the sort of Go community, so I'll go to things like Go for Con and Go UK. It's kind of interesting that with Aqua, we found that the sort of traditional security events, at least a couple of years ago, people just didn't really know about containers, so they couldn't really talk about container security. Yep. But I think that's kind of starting to change now, so we might be seen at more and more security events as well, I think. That's
cool. Yeah, I know that one of our friends, Jay Beal from InGuardians, he's creating a deliberately vulnerable Kubernetes framework. And he's highlighted it at HushCon here in Seattle, but he's working on trying to get that released where, it's a CTF where you could go in and actually hack a Kubernetes environment.
So, that's really great because one of my projects, our project, is Kube Hunter, and it's basically kind of penetration testing for Kubernetes cluster.
Oh, okay.
So it would be really cool to kind of, see that vulnerable cluster and see what we find in it.
Well, I can
Hopefully we'll find something.
I can introduce you to him on Twitter and see if you guys can get a collaboration or something started. So cool. Yeah, I was just wondering, do you see a lot of security people at these Gopher cons or something, because it seems like we have an echo chamber in the InfoSec community, and I was just wondering about how somebody who had a security only paper for Go, for instance, or for Docker or Kubernetes, how it would go over at a Kubernetes conference, for instance.
Security was one of the hottest topics at KubeCon.
Really? Just
gone. That might have something to do with, because I was co-chair just for last year, so
right.
I won't be there I will be there, but I won't be on the keynote stage. Mm-hmm. But when I do a keynote, I'm usually talking about security, so that maybe
cool
makes people think about things like not running as root.
No, agreed. Yeah. I just wondered, do they do like a CFP or something for these conferences?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So the KubeCon, the CFP for Barcelona, which is in May.
Oh, Barcelona.
That CFP is closing on Friday.
Okay.
So
But maybe the one for San Diego would still be available coming up.
San Diego one, I don't even know if it's open yet, but it will be. Yeah, keep your eye open for that. But yes, people, and they like to hear, new voices.
Cool.
Particularly if it's it's got to be pretty cloud native related. It's quite focused on that, but they do like to hear kind of people with a different perspective that they haven't heard before. So yeah.
Okay, cool. We'll probably post this, not this weekend, but the following weekend, because we still have part 2 from our IoT security stuff. And, if Aqua could give us a shout out, that would be great. We'd appreciate it.
Oh, well, sure. Yeah, absolutely. We will. Yeah. Just let us know when it's, when it's published, and we will definitely tweet about it.
Roger that.
LinkedIn about it and all that kind of thing.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you again. Hopefully you can get out to B-Sides Leeds. If not, I know Miss Berlin will be there, but you guys can, say hey and wow.
Yeah, that would be. I will definitely check it out. I can't promise anything because I've got a few things on next week. But,
that's fine.
It's a little last minute notice.
Oh, yeah. It's a little bit. They may be sold out too, for all we know. Yeah,
that's also a possibility.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, Ms. Berlin, safe travels to Leeds, and let us know how everything goes, because we'll have to have you on for an actual show to discuss Leeds and ShmooCon. But yeah, we'll get to you. We'll get with you after you get back from Leeds and discuss. And so safe travels to you, and safe travels to you, Ms. Rice.
Thank you very much.
Cool. All right, Mr. Betcher, pleasure as always, sir. We'll talk again next week. So thank you, everybody.
Sure thing.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Later.